Alright guys, and welcome to another video. Today we're going to be going through the 20 best tips and tricks that you can do on your Death Knight during the pre-patch. These tips will cover a number of different topics, like things you can do right now before Death Knights are even released in order to speed up your leveling, and by extent how to also prepare for the Wrath of the Lich King launch, and in general to save a lot of time. If you like the video guys, please throw me a quick sub. I'm trying to get to 90,000 subs by the end of the year, so it would really help out. The first tip I have is for you to prepare some decent leveling gear for the level 59 to 70 journey. There are varying levels of tryhardness you can do in this process. I've seen people spend thousands of gold just for leveling gear. You obviously don't need to do that. This is what I've prepared. I've got my fell iron set. You'll probably have to ask a blacksmith to get you the full set because they don't normally train the fell iron pieces while they're leveling, so they might not even have to craft, which means it's not very likely to be in the auction house. I asked a friend to keep an eye on the auction house for me and he got me all of the pieces. And then I've also got the Blade of Misfortune. I managed to grab this for just over 200 gold. This is a very useful weapon that will last you until about level 65 to 66. Remember, don't put a weapon chant on it though, you've got rune forging. Apart from that, I also picked up some high strength rings and necklaces that will likely last me all the way until level 70. And if you want to spend a little bit of extra gold, you can get the adamantite gear, although it is a little bit expensive, but it is very nice because you can put some really good gems on it. And while you're leveling, I definitely recommend to pick up the Circle's Stalwart Helm because it has 3 gem sockets. You can put some big bad boy gems in that item piece. Another weapon many people don't know about is the Arcadian Claymore from the Halar vendor. It's only a hairline worse than the Honed Void Axe. The reason why I wouldn't recommend getting the Honed Void Axe is I'd recommend saving those quests for the Wrath of the Lich King launch for a big chunk of XP. Secondly, obviously it'd be a good idea to gem and enchant all the gear pieces that you can. When you enchant the gear, you will make it last longer and it'll probably last you all the way to level 70. Getting hit enchant is very useful here because you want to maintain its 6% hit chance. This will give it a hit chance on mobs 2 levels higher than you. You don't normally attack mobs that are 3 levels higher than you. Another thing I'm going to do is mail myself a few big strength gems, so whenever I pick up other gem slot gear, I can just go to a mailbox, get some gems, and Bob's your uncle. Thirdly, you want to be leveling an Unholy, not BloodSpec. Unholy provides much more superior AoE damage, and it also has very good survivability. I've tested how both specs feel on the beta. Blood is definitely tankier and it's much easier, but it's just much slower at killing things. Since Unholy actually applies another disease effect to the target, the Death Strike healing is increased by another 5% of your maximum health, and if you actually calculate it properly, that's exactly the same as the increased healing as the Blood talent. So basically it doesn't matter whether you're Unholy or BloodSpec, your Death Strike will heal for the same amount. Unholy also provides On a Pale Horse, which is a great increase for your movement speed, and the Unholy Presence talent will actually work before you get to level 70. This means when you're in Frost and Blood Presence you will get an increased 15% movement speed. This is the talent build I'd recommend for you to get at level 59 straight out of a Death Knight starter area. And then obviously when you are level 60 you're going to pick up your Summon Gargoyle. From here you want to immediately get Butchery for practically infinite runic power. Then just finish off Rage of Rivendare, Desolation, and if you're on a PvP server, I'd recommend finishing your points and utility options like Magic Suppression and Desecration. If not, then just go for Blade Barrier and finish off in Bladed Armour. Now what I've gone for here is just what I prefer to go for. It's not absolutely set in stone. You can change points if you want. You may want to get Scur Strike for instance if you're doing more of a dungeon focused leveling grind. But personally, since I only really use Death Strike, I'd never really use Scur Strike. Most of your damage is coming from Death and Decay, Dot, and Corpse Explosion, and this build is optimised around increasing the damage of those abilities. When you can get glyphs, I'd recommend Glyph of Icy Touch, and then Glyph of the Ghoul, and then when Northrend content is released, you can go and get Glyph of Death and Decay. And I'll prioritise this one over Glyph of the Ghoul, because obviously you can only have 2 glyphs pre-level 80. Then for minor, I'd get Corpse Explosion and Pestilence, and then also the convenience of Raise Dead, when you can get that slot. I remember, while you're leveling, you should always be cleaving and trying to do as much AoE damage as you possibly can. Why kill one mob when you can kill about 4 at the same time? This is how I'd recommend for you to play. First of all, you'll be pre-popping your Unholy Frenzy because you don't want to be entering combat without that Unholy rune available, so pre-pop it, wait a few seconds, and then get into combat, so you kind of use it between pulls. which is fine since the buff actually does last 30 seconds. Then what you're going to do is you're going to mount up and get some mobs clumped up. Then you try and LOS if you can, you pop Death and Decay, you get your dots up, you pop Pestilence to spread all those dots, then you wait for runes, and normally you use Death Strike to top your health up. During that phase you're probably going to be worried that your health is dropping, but just be patient and don't panic, because when your runes come off cooldown and then you can start using Death Strike, your health will top up. Then what you do is you consume your runic power with Corpse Explosion and Rune Strike. What I like to have is a Corpse Explosion and Rune Strike macro, because Rune Strike is actually off the global cooldown, you can actually put it with any other ability. I prefer to have it with Corpse Explosion so I don't accidentally use Rune Strike when I need runic power for something else. And you really don't want to be using macros like that while you're tanking or at endgame, because you might accidentally use a Rune Strike, drop your runic power, and then you can't do something like Death Pact, Icebound Fortitude, or even something like a Mind Freeze. Remember to use Blood Strike to keep up your Desolation buff. And what I normally like to do is actually save runic power until the next pull. I'm only really using runic power with Corpse Explosion, very rarely will I use a Death Coil. I'll only do it if I'm really generating way too much runic power, which does tend to happen when you get the Butchery talent. Remember to maintain Horn of Winter and Bone Shield. You will get Horn of Winter at level 65, and obviously keep the pets up. What I'd recommend is to get some weak auras to remind you when these buffs are not currently active. And obviously stay in Blood Presence for the whole time. May want to do Frost Presence if you're doing a really big pull, but in my experience, Blood Presence is normally better. And remember, you've got cooldowns like Icebound Fortitude, Death Pact and Anti-Magic Shell if you need that extra survivability if you're doing even bigger pulls. And remember, you can kite with abilities like Chains of Ice. It's an insane snare in Wrath of the Lich King, starting at 95% of and gradually degrading. And it will also technically deal damage because it will infect the target with Frost Fever, so you can kite that mob forever. Another method of pulling, which I'd recommend if you are taking too much damage and struggling to survive, is to forget Death and Decay. And once you spread your diseases, go straight into Death Striking. That will increase your survivability and make things easier, and will also allow you to do constant chain pulls. This is where you pretty much just spam Death Strike and use the occasional Pestilence when you're reapplying your diseases to a new mob, and because you're constantly refreshing those diseases, you will no longer have to go back to Icy Touch and Plague Strike. And yeah, you just Pestilence, Death Strike, keep running around, and you can chain pull as many mobs as you want. But obviously don't get too carried away and end up killing yourself. Remember, you can use Dark Command for range pulls if you want to pull more mobs to you. You can combine that with Death Grip and Icy Touch. Here is a quick Death and Decay macro that will basically use it where your cursor is currently positioned when you use the keybind. Now, if you're going to do dungeon grinding all the way to level 70, you honestly don't need to spec Deep Blood. You're more than capable of tanking dungeons in Unholy spec, just throw on Frost Presence and get tank gear. You may want to buy just some cheap green champion gear for the defense rating. It will mean that your group will have much superior AoE damage, which means faster clears and faster XP. You can use this adjusted build for some extra survivability, but if you have an absolute Giga Chad healer, then it's probably not needed. What you're going to do is you're going to spec down to Unholy for Wandering Plague, pick up Blade Barrier, and then you'll finish your last points in the Frost Tree for the increased armor contribution. Icy Reach is also quite nice for pulling in more mobs, since it increases the range of Icy Touch. Then when you're in the high level 60s, you want to get Lichborn, because that can be a nice survivability cooldown for when you need it, and then finish off your points in Black Ice. But if you are leveling solo, the best thing to do is to get a really good leveling guide. Rest XP is definitely the best one out there. It's been made by the world record holding speedrunners for World of Warcraft. And they are also now taking pre-orders for the Wrath of the Lich King leveling guide. You'll find all the information to that in the description down below. Another thing you'll want to do is prepare your profession materials. Although, I would hesitate to do it right now. We need to really wait and see if engineering is going to get nerfed, because obviously level working got nerfed in the TBC beta. Maybe it might happen to engineering in the future, so I'd hold the horses with that one, and we also need to find out which secondary profession will sim the highest. But what I mean by that is, what is the best profession to pair with engineering? But obviously doing this in a pre-patch will increase the gold cost dramatically, because the increased demand and the shorter supply will put up the prices of basic old world materials. Remember that strength gear is always better than the alternative agility leather gear, even if it has attack power. Okay, your pet only scales off primary stats, not attack power. plus strength scales better with talents like Ravenous Dead, that increases your strength by 3%. The next best stat to get is hit chance, like I've mentioned. Maintain that at 6%, but then after that you want to prioritise crit. This increases Wandering Plague procs massively, increasing AoE damage and kill speeds. And the same goes for Wrath of the Lich King levelling, and when at endgame you want to optimise your AoE damage. Personally, I'd only go for leather pieces if, first of all, you absolutely need the hit chance in order to maintain 6%, and you physically see that the attack power on that gear piece does provide an increase to your melee DPS. Otherwise, it is best avoided because it's usually worse than strength gear, and obviously, because it has less armour, it's going to make you squishier. Always keep your Hearthstone at somewhere close to where you're levelling, because you're going to have to go back to the Death Knight starter area to pick up new abilities very frequently. There's a lot of ranks crammed into the level 60 to 70 journey. The only levels you don't need to go back for are levels 64 and 69. You have to go back to ARCHERUS for every single other level to pick up new spell ranks. And obviously new abilities, like for instance level 60, your juicy Death and Decay. Now I'd recommend getting some gold ready so you can get dual spec straight away, because although we're not going to level in blood spec, it is very useful sometimes while you're leveling. Because sometimes you will have to solo some elite quests. Now Unholy is good for soloing elites, the survivability is good and the gargoyle helps to get the mob down. Plus remember, you do have your pet stun. However, it's definitely easier in blood spec, so if you're struggling, it is better to just use blood spec. This will also massively help when you get into Northrend, because from my experience of the beta, some of the group quests on there are very difficult. Blood is simply just better at soloing stuff than Unholy, so you could be losing out on some bonus experience if you can't get that quest completed in Unholy spec, and obviously if you also cannot find a group for that quest. Now this is the build that I'd recommend. It's very important to get the talent epidemic, otherwise you're going to have to refresh your diseases way too often, and when you're refreshing your diseases, then that's a waste of a death strike. So unless you have the glyph of disease, it's very difficult to keep your dots up, and you're probably not going to have those glyphs at launch. I prioritise Center, Blood and Butchery for the really good runic power generation. This means that using defensive abilities won't nerf your damage too much. Vendetta is very useful because a number of these elite quests you're going to be doing are going to be the big elemental dudes that split into multiple different mobs when you're trying to take them down, so when you actually kill those little mobs you will get 6% of your health back. Classic example will be the rock people in Hellfire Peninsula or Nether Rock in Netherstorm. I've skipped Hysteria because in my experience your health just drops a little bit too much that I'm comfortable for while I use it. And we're not going deep into the blood tree because in my experience you are never over 75% health. Well, I mean you are sometimes, but for the majority of the time you are not. And plus we really need the epidemic in the Unholy tree. And then from here, you know, you can get points into Ravenous Undead, because that's great because it stacks with Abominable Might and Veteran of the Third War for lots of increased strength. Then you can finish off by putting some points into the Might of Mograine. These are basically just the talents I'd recommend getting while you're leveling because they are just flat, very basic DPS increases. Now another thing that helps with survivability is obviously health potions. Now I know that people have mentioned to me that health potions do stack to 20 pieces a stack, and that is a change implemented in Wrath of the Lich King, but that is not currently in place, so if you want to save some bag space, definitely get health injectors, not health potions. Speed potions are very useful because you can use them in interior locations. Obviously when you can't benefit from mount speed, they're great for a quick getaway to get out of a cave, which will happen from time to time. Sharpening stones are useful, particularly as they persist through death. They're usable until around about level 76 because they won't work on higher item level items. I recommend definitely stacking a few for your level 60 to 70 journey. If you have a little bit of extra gold to spare, you can also get flasks and food. Obviously the flask will persist through death, so it's a safer bet. But obviously you can get the cheaper ones like Fell Strength or Major Strength. In my opinion, I would go for Major Strength because it increases pet damage, whereas Fell Strength doesn't. I also don't like the stamina reduction on Fell Strength, plus Major Strength ones are much cheaper. Remember that there is actually a mailbox in the Death Knight starter area, so you can send some stuff to you straight away at level 55, well probably like level 56 by the time you get down there. In my opinion, it's a waste of time to give yourself gear at that point because you're going to replace it incredibly quickly. The Death Knight starter gear is insanely good, and the weapon is the best thing attainable at that level, even the one you get before the last quest. and the one that you get straight away, but it's definitely worth giving yourself some consumables. Now another sneaky thing you can do when you get your Death Knight out of the DK starter area is go to Light Soap Chapel and instantly turn in the quests there with items that you can send from your main, since these items are tradable items and not soulbound questing items. You will actually need friendly reputation with the Argent Dawn, which can be very quickly done with the Cauldrons questline, which will also net you over 100,000 experience. And you can take this even further by preparing cloth items for the faction turn-ins and get a mage to teleport you to all the major cities to quickly go and turn those in. That will again net you over another 100,000 experience points. You can also go to the Blasted Lands to do the quests there, since they do not require quest items, they are tradable items that you can pre-prepare on your main. And there's also some in Silithus. I'd also actually recommend doing a few of the quests in Silithus because it's a totally uncontested area. You won't have any competition for quests because all the other Death Knights have been Hellfire Peninsula, and the quest from Silithus quests is actually pretty good. And if you want more information about this, I have made an entire video about it, and I've also got a really big quest list that all my members and Twitch subs can gain access to. Go on my Discord to find more information about that. And we can also do quest prep for the Wrath of the Lich King launch during this pre-patch. So one thing to remember while leveling is the biggest, chunkiest quest turn-ins are the dungeon quests. So you may want to refrain from doing dungeon quests while leveling and save them for when Wrath of the Lich King launches to turn them in then for a big chunk of XP. Another thing I will be doing is I won't be doing Ring of Blood while I'm leveling. I'm going to save that for Wrath of the Lich King launch. There's also a number of items that drop in the open world that start a quest, and obviously you can have those in your bag ready to go even though you already have 25 quests ready to turn in for even more experience. And then there's also the reputation turn-ins. The first time you turn these in, they will actually grant experience, so make sure you don't do that while you're leveling. You can save that stuff for the Wrath of the Lich King launch. Again, I have an entire video on how to really optimize this method, and also a really huge quest list that has just been recently revamped and improved, and again, members and Twitch subs can gain access to that. It's all on my Discord. Now when it comes to gear farming in a pre-patch, this is what I'd recommend. The first priority, in my opinion, is to get the PvP gear, especially the PvP two-handed weapon. This is the best reward for time spent. And then you can get the off pieces, because unfortunately the Death Knight set for level 70 was added in Cataclysm, but anyway, wrists, boots, belt, they are perfect for a Death Knight. The ring and neck, they're not so great because again they have attack power and not strength on them, but the neck is pretty decent because you can throw a big strength gem in it. Then from there, I'd recommend doing as many heroic dungeons as you can, particularly Magister's Terrace, because even normal mode has really good gear from it. And obviously while you're doing that, you will be farming badges, which you can then spend on the badge vendor. Obviously the Phase 6 badge vendor from the Isle of Quel'Danas is definitely the best one to go for. I reckon you'll easily be able to farm enough badges for a couple of pieces from that guy during the pre-patch. And then if you farm even more and actually run out of stuff to buy on that guy, there's also the Zul'Aman badge vendor in Shattrath. And obviously, I'd recommend, if you can, to do as many raids as you possibly can. You'll probably easily be able to get into Zul'Aman and Karazhan, and this is why I recommend for you to level up as fast as possible, because the more Karazhan and Zul'Aman clears you can get done before the Wrath of the Lich King launch, the better you're going to be off. But my recommendation on this is don't be stupid and don't be wasting money in GDKPs on your Death Knight unless you were buying things really dirt cheap like less than 100 gold. I can tell you now, I'm not spending more than 100 gold on any gear piece on my Death Knight in GDKPs. Apart from maybe trinkets, I might want to spend a little bit more on that, because in order to get good trinkets in Wrath of the Lich King you normally have to farm a lot of heroics to kill the same boss and over again, and honestly the trinkets aren't that great in Wrath until you start doing some raids. But guys, you know, don't be wasting your golden gear pieces from TBC raids. You're definitely going to be replacing them by the time you get into Storm Peaks and Ice Crown. Now if you can, I'd recommend farming as much Violet Eye and Hydro reputation as you can, but don't turn in the quests for the ring rewards until the Wrath of the Lich King launch. Every time you gain reputation to a new rank, you obviously get a new ring, and then you can get another quest. The thing is, when Wrath launches, you can turn in a total of 4 quests for a huge chunk of experience points. I'd only recommend doing this if you can actually get it to revered, and you can optimize these turn-ins into a good Raffle Lich King launch quest turning in route kind of thing, whatever you want to call it. And that will also be coming very soon on my quest list. But anyway guys, that is going to be the end of the video there. Haven't already, please go and check out my second channel. There's going to be some interesting content going out there very soon. But anyway, my name is MetaGoblin. To the next video, ciao.